Hi, I'm Sandy Briggs, and I'm here today to interview Mr. Samuel Behrman, an attorney who has practiced in Pensacola for 33 years and whose specialty is personal liability. Today we'll be talking about a topic which many of us are familiar with in some way, shape, or form: environmental claims. Good morning, Mr. Behrman.
Good morning.
What exactly is considered an environmental claim?
That's a good question, because a lot of people don't think of environmental claims like they think of other cases. People think about claims arising from automobile accidents or think about claims arising from oil spills. But an environmental claim has a lot in common with those types of cases. For example, if I own a house and my next door neighbor pours contaminants all over my yard accidentally or intentionally, well, should I have a claim against that next door neighbor for what he's done to my property? The answer is yes. If he does the same thing to the property underneath the surface of my property, that is the underground, under my property, do I have a claim? Yes, I do, because I own the property not just on the surface, but I also own the property going down under the surface. And so if there are contaminants that my neighbor puts under my property that theoretically could cause problems such as vapors coming up into the house, or otherwise could affect the health of those in my house, or could affect my property value, because if anybody wants to buy the property from me, I've got to tell them that I've got these contaminants underground. Should that be a claim that I have against the party responsible for putting the contaminants on the ground or under the ground of my property? And the answer is yes.
Who would actually have a legitimate claim?
If due to some type of damage to your property, you have been affected in terms of, again, loss of property value or the risk of health problems or other concerns, then you have a claim. For example, I was involved in a case in which a number of companies put a plume of terrible contaminants underground here in Escambia County, and that plume traveled. And that plume ended up under the property of at least about 4,000 property owners here in Pensacola. Now, if you're one of those property owners and you have a plume of contaminants under your property, you're concerned about your health. You're concerned about the health of your family, because there is such a thing as vapor intrusion, where vapor from the contaminants can come into the building that sits on top of the plume. Another thing is that, again, if you ever go to sell your property and a buyer comes along and you know that you have a plume of arsenic and other contaminants underneath your house, you're required to tell that prospective buyer that, well, I want you to know the house is beautiful and you're going to love living here, but I do need to tell you that there is a plume of contaminants, some of which may be cancer-causing, sitting under this property, and I'm required to tell you that. Well, that's going to affect the property value. So the answer to your question is anybody who suffers a loss as a result of that type of environmental contamination. It can be over the surface of your property, as in the air being polluted, because you do own that air right over your property. It can be right on your property, or it can be under your property as well.
Once again, the term damages. What would be considered the damages in terms of an environmental claim?
That's another good question. And what you do is you look at how the property owner has been affected. Has it affected his health? Difficult to answer that question oftentimes, because there's so many things that affects one's health. But if you can identify that contamination under one's property or over one's property has affected one's health, then that's a claim that you have against the party causing the pollution. Has it affected the property value, what we talked about a moment ago? has it affected the property value? Do you have a $100,000 property that all of a sudden is only worth $50,000 because you got a plume of contaminants under the property? So the whole idea is to make the victim, for lack of a better word, whole. The victim is the one who has property that's been affected by environmental contamination. And again, it's important to understand that when you own property, you just don't own the surface of the land and the structure on it. You also own the underground, and you own the right to access the air over it. And so if those things are affected, you're going to have a claim.
Are governmental agencies, either national or state, involved in this type claim?
They are with what's called the Superfund site. So I talked to you about a case a moment ago where there was this huge plume that a number of chemical companies created that went underground here in Pensacola and spread under about 4,000 properties, at least 4,000 properties. That turned out to be a Superfund site. That means that the federal government did get involved in the cleanup of it, although it's not been cleaned up, and the plume continues to this day. And you can imagine that a plume of contaminants spread a number of miles is hard to clean up. How do you go about cleaning that up? It's very difficult to do. So the answer is that with some contaminated sites, the federal government gets involved. They're oftentimes called Superfund sites. That's the phrase that's used, or the term that's used. And the state Environmental Protection Agency oftentimes gets involved in contaminated sites as well, but not always. There can be a terrible area of contamination that for one reason or another the federal government has not gotten involved or the state has not gotten involved. We're taking a look at a case now where a body of water, Escambia Bay, has been terribly polluted by a company that put contaminants in the bay. And the federal government's not involved in that. The state government has been monitoring that, but really hasn't issued any sanctions nor any type of cleanup. And we think that's a terrible environmental situation.
How long will this process take, beginning to end?
These claims oftentimes take longer than other lawsuits because they're more complicated. The proof that contamination has gone under somebody's property or over somebody's property or onto somebody's property is not always easy. Trying to prove that one's health has been affected. I mean, if you have somebody who develops cancer and the question is whether or not the cancer is from contaminants under the property or on the property versus other sources of cancer, it's difficult to prove. And these can be significant claims. I mean, trying to clean up Escambia Bay from the contaminants put in there by this manufacturer is an expensive process. And so the environmental polluters take a hard line typically. A, they didn't pollute. B, if they did pollute, the pollution wasn't very significant. C, if the pollution was significant, it didn't cause too many damages to anybody. So these cases can be difficult, time-consuming, and longer than a typical lawsuit. A motor vehicle accident lawsuit may take less than 2 years. These will take longer typically.